A Hell's Angel heard crying in the woods and found his estranged daughter chained to a tree. The road didn't ask questions. That was the thing Jack Callahan loved most about it. No sideways glances, no whispered judgments, just cracked asphalt stretching out ahead of him, lined on both sides by tall Virginia pines that swayed gently in the late afternoon wind. The sky above was turning that deep, bruised orange that only shows up in autumn, when the sun starts giving up earlier than it should. Jack rode slow. There was no reason to hurry. His motorcycle was a 1987 Harley-Davidson Sportster, dark navy with chrome that had seen better days. He had rebuilt her himself, piece by piece, in the small garage behind his rental house on the edge of Delwood, Virginia. Population? Not enough to matter. That was how Jack liked it. Small, quiet, easy to disappear. He wore a plain black jacket, the kind with no patches and no name on the back. That was intentional. The patches were gone now. Burned, actually. He had stood in the backyard one night 7 years ago and watched them curl and blacken in an old metal trash can, and he had felt something between relief and grief that he still couldn't fully name. He was 45 years old. He looked like a man who had carried heavy things for a long time. His jaw was sharp and shadowed with stubble that was more gray than black now. His hands on the handlebars were thick and scarred, the knuckles bumped from old breaks that hadn't healed quite right. His eyes were dark brown, deep-set, and quiet, in a way that made some people nervous without knowing exactly why. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now, back to the story. He wasn't trying to scare anybody these days. The road curved gently to the left, and the trees pressed in closer on both sides. This stretch was one of his favorites. No houses, no traffic, just the hum of the engine and the smell of pine and cool earth rising up from the woods. On a good day, it almost felt like peace. He wasn't sure this was a good day. He had woken up thinking about Lily. That happened sometimes. He would be fine for a stretch of weeks, keeping busy with repair jobs and solitary routines, and then her face would just appear in his mind first thing in the morning before he was even fully awake. His daughter. 16 now, if his counting was right. He had missed so many birthdays that the numbers felt abstract, like figures in someone else's life. Her mother, Carol, had made it very clear a long time ago that Jack's presence was more dangerous than his absence. He hadn't fought it. He told himself it was because she was right. Some days he even believed that. He eased off the throttle a little, letting the bike slow as he rounded a bend where the road dipped slightly toward a low creek crossing. The water was shallow and clear, rushing over smooth brown stones. He had stopped here before. Sometimes he would cut the engine and just sit for a minute, listening to the creek and the birds and the wind in the trees, reminding himself that the world still had quiet places in it. He didn't stop this time. He kept riding, letting the rhythm of the road settle into his chest the way it always did. Steady. Predictable. The one thing in his life that had never let him down, or turned on him, or looked at him like he was something broken beyond fixing. The pines thickened on his right side, deepening into shadow. The sun was getting lower now, slipping behind the tree line, and the light coming through the branches was thin and golden and full of dust. And then he heard it. He almost missed it. It was so faint at first, barely more than a shift in the wind. But something in it stopped his breath. A sound. High and broken and desperate, threading through the trees like it was being carried a long distance just to reach him. A cry. Jack squeezed the brake. Jack. The Harley slowed and stopped on the shoulder of the road. He sat very still, engine idling, and listened. It came again. He was already moving toward the tree line. Jack killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy. Just the wind now, and the distant sound of the creek, and that cry still hanging in his memory like smoke. He swung off the bike and stood at the edge of the road. The tree line was maybe 20 feet away. The pines were dense here, packed close together, their lower branches tangled with wild shrubs and dead brush, the kind of woods that swallowed light fast. He stood there for a moment, listening hard. Nothing. He told himself it could have been an animal, a fox maybe. Foxes could sound almost human when they were scared. He knew that. He had heard it before, but his feet were already moving toward the trees. He ducked under the first low branch and pushed through a wall of brush. Dry twigs snapped under his boots. The ground was soft and uneven beneath the carpet of old pine needles, and the smell changed immediately. Damp earth. Decay. The deep, closed-in smell of a forest that didn't get much sun. He moved carefully. Years of old discipline settled back into his body without him asking it to. Quiet steps. Eyes scanning. Head up. The light inside the tree line was thin and greenish, filtered down through layers of branch and needle. The trunks around him were tall and straight, their bark rough and dark. Between them, the undergrowth twisted and tangled, making it hard to see more than 30 feet in any direction. He stopped again and listened. The cry came a third time. Closer now. It was human. He was certain of that. There was a texture to it, a raggedness that no animal carried quite the same way. It was the sound of something with a voice trying desperately not to use it too loudly. Like whoever it was had learned that being heard by the wrong ears was worse than suffering in silence. Jack moved toward it. He pushed deeper into the woods, stepping over a fallen log that was soft with rot. The ground sloped gently downward here, and the trees grew even closer together. He had to turn sideways at one point to squeeze through a gap between two thick pines. That was when he saw the first sign. A piece of fabric, small and pale blue, snagged on a low branch at about waist height. He stopped and looked at it without touching it. It was torn, not cut. Ripped away in a hurry. The edges were frayed, and there was a faint, rust-colored smear on one corner that made his stomach tighten. He looked down. The ground around the base of the branch was disturbed. Pine needles pushed aside. Dirt scraped up in two long, parallel grooves, like something had been dragged, or like someone had been digging their heels in, trying to slow down. Jack crouched low and studied it, his jaw set hard. He followed the marks with his eyes. They led deeper into the woods, curving around a thick cluster of trees and disappearing into shadow. He straightened and kept moving. 20 feet further, he found a shoe. A single sneaker, white with a pink stripe along the sole. It was lying on its side in the dirt, the laces still tied. Like it had come off a foot that was moving too fast to stop for it. He stood over it and said nothing. There was nothing to say. His chest was doing something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite fear. Heavier than that. He pressed on. The trees opened slightly into a small, natural clearing, no bigger than a living room. The ground was churned up here. Boot prints everywhere, more than one set of them. Heavy treads pressed deep into the soft earth. And in the center of the clearing, a broken branch as thick as his forearm snapped clean off a nearby trunk and lying in the dirt like it had been grabbed and used for something. The air felt wrong, charged and still at the same time. And then, just past the far edge of the clearing, through the last tight cluster of pines, he heard it again. Close. Very close. Jack pushed through the last wall of brush and stopped. She was there. A girl. Young, maybe mid-teens, with dark, tangled hair plastered against her face and neck. She was sitting at the base of a wide pine tree, her back pressed hard against the bark, like she was trying to disappear into it. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. Her arms were stretched behind her, wrapped around the trunk, and her wrists were bound in chains. Heavy chains, the kind used for towing or hauling. Dark iron links looped twice around the tree and padlocked together behind it, with her wrists caught inside the loop. The metal had bitten into her skin. Even from where Jack stood, he could see the raw, angry marks on her wrists where the chain had rubbed. She was soaked through. Her light jacket was torn at the shoulder. Mud caked her jeans from the knees down. There was a cut above her left eyebrow, dried blood tracking down the side of her face in a thin, dark line. Her bottom lip was split. She was shaking, not just a little. Her whole body trembled, the kind of deep shaking that came from cold and fear mixed together into something that had no name. Her eyes found him first. They went wide. She sucked in a breath and opened her mouth like she was about to scream. "Hey!" Jack's voice came out low and steady, barely above a whisper. He raised both hands, palms out, and stayed exactly where he was. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You hear me? I'm not with anybody. I'm alone." Her mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. Her chest heaved. She stared at him the way a cornered animal stared, like she was calculating the distance between them and deciding whether she had any options left. He could see her deciding. "I heard you crying," he said quietly. "That's all. I just heard you, and I came." Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, but the screaming impulse passed behind her eyes and didn't come out. Jack took one slow step forward. Then another. He kept his hands where she could see them, kept his voice at that same low and careful level. "I'm going to come a little closer, okay? I want to see if you're hurt." She let out a breath. It trembled on the way out. He closed the distance slowly and crouched down in front of her so he wasn't towering over her. At this level, her face was right in front of him, and he could see her clearly now. The exhaustion carved into the skin under her eyes, the dried tear tracks cutting through the dirt on her cheeks, the way her lips were pressed together, fighting to hold something in. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16. His throat tightened. He shifted his gaze to the chains without looking away from her for long. Heavy gauge. A basic padlock, old but solid. He reached out slowly and touched the link nearest her wrist, and she flinched hard. "Sorry," he said immediately. "I'm sorry. I'm going to get you out of this." He examined the padlock without touching her wrists. The chain was looped twice, the lock threaded through the last link on each end. He tested the tension. Tight. Whoever had done this had done it deliberately. There was a purpose to it. It wasn't random. His back teeth pressed together. He pulled off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders without asking, because she was shaking and that was enough reason. Then he stood and looked around the clearing. His eyes landed on a heavy rock half buried near the tree roots, flat on one side and thick enough to carry some weight. He pulled it free from the dirt. He came back to her, positioned himself, and looked her in the eye one more time. "Look away from this," he said firmly, "and keep your hands as still as you can." She nodded. Jack raised the rock above the padlock and brought it down hard. The rock came down again and again. The padlock groaned on the third strike. A small crack split across the body of it, thin as a hair, but real. Jack felt it give just slightly under the blow. He hit it again. Metal sang against metal. The sound rang out through the trees, sharp and quick, and birds scattered from somewhere above in a rush of wings. Jack didn't stop. He repositioned his grip on the rock, set his jaw, and brought it down one final time with everything he had. The lock snapped. The chain went slack all at once, the tension releasing like a breath, finally let go. The heavy links fell away from the tree trunk and hit the ground with a dull clank, coiling in the dirt like a dead thing. Jack dropped the rock and moved immediately to her wrists. He worked the chain loose from around them carefully, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he unwound the last loop. The metal had left deep red grooves pressed into her skin. He held her wrists loosely for just a moment, not gripping, just cradling, and looked at the marks. The tightness in his chest got worse. He let her wrists go softly and looked up at her face. She was staring at him. Her eyes were dark brown, wide open, glassy with something that hadn't spilled over yet. For a moment she didn't move at all. She just sat there against the tree trunk, her newly freed arms still stretched slightly behind her out of habit, like her body hadn't caught up to the fact that the chain was gone. Then it hit her. Her face crumpled. Not all at once, but in pieces. Her chin went first, trembling. Then her brow pulled together. Her breath came in a single sharp pull, ragged at the edges, and her shoulders dropped forward like something heavy had just been cut loose from them. She pitched forward. Jack caught her. Both arms went around her automatically, pulling her in close. She was small, much smaller than she had looked pressed against that tree. Her whole frame seemed to fold into him, her forehead dropping against his chest, her freed hands gripping the front of his shirt with both fists, like she was afraid of falling even though she was already on the ground. She was crying, not the faint, broken sound he had heard from the road. This was different. This came from somewhere deep, the kind of crying that had been held back for a very long time, and had finally found a door left open. It shook her whole body in waves, quiet and desperate at the same time. Jack held her. He didn't say anything. There were no words that fit this moment. He just kept one arm firm around her back and rested his other hand gently on the back of her head, and he let her cry. The forest was quiet around them. The late afternoon light filtered down through the pine branches in thin golden strips, touching the forest floor in patches. Somewhere far above, the wind moved through the high branches with a low and steady sound. He didn't know how long they stayed like that. After a while, the shaking slowed. Her grip on his shirt loosened just slightly. Her breathing started to find a rhythm, uneven still, but calming. Coming back. She lifted her head. She looked up at him, her face wet, her dark eyes searching his with an expression he couldn't quite read. Like she was looking for something specific, like she was checking whether what she was seeing was real. Jack looked back at her. And then something happened in his chest. A slow, strange turning, like a key in a lock that hadn't been opened in a very long time. Her face. He knew that face. Her lips parted. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, small and worn and full of something that broke clean through every wall he had ever built. Dad. Jack couldn't move. He just knelt there in the dirt, holding her, his whole body locked up like a machine that had suddenly lost power. The word hung in the air between them, small and enormous at the same time. Dad. His throat closed. His eyes burned. He blinked hard, once, and looked at her face again. Really looked. Searched it the way a man searches for something he lost a long time ago and stopped believing he would ever find. There it was. The line of her jaw. The slight upturn at the corner of her nose. The shape of her dark brown eyes, steady even now, even through all the fear and the tears. He had seen those eyes before, in a hospital room 17 years ago, when they were brand new to the world, when everything was still possible. Lily. Her name came out rough, scraped raw. She nodded once. Slow and certain. Jack pulled her back in. He held her tight, his eyes squeezing shut, one hand pressed flat against the back of her head. She didn't resist. She leaned into him like she was too tired to do anything else. But he couldn't stay still for long. He knew that. He pulled back gently and held her by both shoulders, looking her over with quick, careful eyes. The way he used to scan a room before he walked into it. Old instinct. Still sharp. Are you hurt? His voice was low, controlled. Can you tell me where you're hurt? Lily wiped her face with the back of her hand. She swallowed. My wrists and my side. She winced as she shifted her weight. I think I maybe bruised a rib. I fell pretty hard when I was running. Jack moved quickly. He checked her wrists first, turning them gently in his hands. The grooves left by the chain were deep and red, but the skin wasn't broken. He pressed 2 fingers softly along the side of her ribs. She flinched and sucked in a breath. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, don't move too fast. He sat back on his heels and looked around. The forest had gone still again. Just the wind in the high pines and the soft creak of branches settling. Nothing moving between the trees. Nothing he could see. But still. He didn't like the feeling in the air. Too quiet in the wrong kind of way. We can't stay here. He looked back at her. Can you walk? Yes. No hesitation. She meant it. Good. He stood and offered her his hand. She took it and got to her feet slowly, pressing her free arm against her injured side. She was steadier than he expected. Considering everything, she was remarkably steady. But he didn't pull her toward the tree line yet. Something was nagging at him. Something about the chain. He glanced down at it where it lay in the dirt. Heavy gauge steel. Not the kind of thing someone throws on a person in a hurry. It had been looped deliberately. The padlock was old but solid. This wasn't a quick restraint. He looked at her. Lily. He kept his voice even. Who put that chain on you? She met his eyes, and something shifted in her expression. The fear was still there, but something else moved behind it now. Something like steadiness. Like she had already made peace with a hard truth and was deciding whether he was ready to hear it. Nobody, she said. Jack stared at her. I did it myself. Her voice was quiet but clear. I put it on myself. The words landed like stones in still water. I knew they were tracking me through the woods. She glanced toward the trees, then back at him. Her jaw was set. If I kept moving, they were going to find me. So I stopped. I found the tree, and I chained myself to it, and I stayed still. She exhaled slowly. The chain wasn't to keep me trapped, Dad. It was to keep me hidden. Jack stared at her for a long moment. He didn't speak. He just turned the information over in his mind slowly, the way a man handles something fragile that he doesn't want to break. His eyes moved across her face, across the bruise along her cheekbone, across the red marks on her wrists, across the dirty, torn jacket she had wrapped tight around herself against the cold. She had done this herself. She had run through these woods, afraid and hurting, and instead of curling up and giving in, she had thought, she had planned. She had made herself small and still, and she had survived. He didn't know whether to be proud or devastated. He felt both at the same time. How long were you out here? He asked. Since before dawn. She pressed her lips together. Maybe 10 hours, maybe more. 10 hours, alone, chained to a tree in the rain. Jack exhaled through his nose. He didn't let it show on his face, but something deep inside him twisted hard. "Who are they?" he said. "The men hunting you. How many?" Lily's eyes dropped for just a second, then came back up. "I counted 4, maybe 5. I only saw them clearly for a minute before I ran." She paused. "They were with the transport crew. The one I got pulled in with." "Transport crew," he repeated slowly. "They move people." Her voice was flat, careful, like she was choosing each word the way you choose your footing on uneven ground. "They picked me up outside Danville. I thought it was a job, moving freight, loading boxes." She shook her head. "It wasn't freight." Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't push her for more. Not right now. She had given him enough to understand the shape of the danger. The details could come later, somewhere safe, somewhere dry, somewhere far from these trees. "Okay." He stepped closer and touched her shoulder lightly. "Right now we move. Can you still walk?" "I told you yes." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "Then stay behind me," he said. "Step where I step. Don't talk unless I ask you something. If I tell you to get down, you get down fast. No questions." Lily nodded. She had the look of someone who had already survived too much to argue about the small stuff. Jack moved first. He kept low and pushed through the undergrowth carefully, bending branches instead of snapping them, watching the ground for dry leaves that would crunch and give them away. He moved like a man who had spent years knowing that being heard first meant losing. Lily followed close. She was quiet. Good at it, actually. Quiet in a way that surprised him. She matched his pace and kept her breathing steady and didn't make a sound beyond the soft press of her shoes against the wet earth. They moved north, away from the direction she had pointed when she mentioned the transport crew. Jack kept the sun in his peripheral vision, using it to hold his bearings. There was an old ranger trail he had seen once, years back, about half a mile through the pines. If they could reach it, he could circle back to his bike without crossing open ground. He kept scanning left and right, kept his ears open. The forest was still. Birds had gone quiet. That was the first thing he noticed. A moment ago there had been movement in the high branches. Small sounds. Now nothing. Just the wind and the soft drip of rainwater falling from pine needles to the forest floor. Jack slowed. He held one hand back behind him, palm out. "Stop." Lily stopped immediately. He stood absolutely still and listened. And then he heard it. Voices. Low. Moving. Coming from somewhere through the trees to the east, maybe 200 yards out. More than one man. The tone was flat and deliberate, the sound of people who were not hiking, not wandering, searching. They were close, and they were getting closer. Jack did not move. Not even a breath. He stood like something carved out of the forest itself, one hand still raised behind him, keeping Lily exactly where she was. His eyes swept left to right across the tree line ahead. Slow. Steady. The way you watch a fire you are not sure is out yet. The voices were getting clearer now. Not the words, not yet. Just the shape of them. The low rumble of men who were not worried about being heard. Men who felt comfortable in these woods. Men who believed they had the upper hand. That told him something. Jack reached back and found Lily's sleeve without looking. He gripped it gently and pulled her sideways, guiding her behind a cluster of thick pines pressed close together. The trunks were wide and dark with rain. Good cover. He positioned her between two of the biggest ones and turned so his body was between her and the sound. Lily pressed her back against the bark, Her breathing was controlled. He could tell she was working at it, keeping herself calm through sheer will. She didn't grab at him, didn't make a sound, just watched his face and waited for his next signal. He respected that more than he could say. Jack crouched slightly and peered around the left side of the tree. The forest ahead dipped into a shallow gully. Beyond it, through the gray tangle of branches and pine needles, he could see movement. Dark shapes. 2 of them visible, moving parallel to one another through the undergrowth about 150 yards out. They were sweeping the area, not running, walking with purpose, pushing branches aside, checking the ground, checking the gaps between trees. Methodical, practiced. These weren't scared men. These were men who did this kind of thing regularly. Jack pulled back and pressed his shoulder against the trunk. His mind was already working. The gully between them was a problem. If he and Lily stayed put, the sweep would bring those men close enough to spot disturbed ground. The wet earth around the oak tree where Lily had been chained was torn up. Footprints everywhere. If the searchers swung south, they would find it in minutes, and from there the trail would lead them straight here. But if he and Lily moved now, they risked being heard. He looked down at the ground between the trees. Wet pine needles, soft and quiet underfoot. Not perfect, but better than dry leaves. He traced a path west with his eyes, away from the gully, deeper into the dark stretch of forest where the canopy was thickest and the light barely reached. He leaned close to Lily's ear. "We go west," he breathed. The words were barely sound at all. "Slow. Right behind me." She gave one small nod. They moved. Jack picked every footfall with care. He avoided sticks, avoided the shallow puddles that would splash. He kept to the dark patches of ground where the pine canopy overhead had kept the worst of the rain from pooling. Lily moved with him step for step. She was learning his rhythm fast, adapting. The girl had good instincts, and she was using them. They made it 20 yards, then 30. The voices behind them shifted slightly. One of the men called out to the other, short, clipped, a direction. Jack couldn't make out the words, but the tone had changed, more focused. They had found something. 40 yards now. The trees thickened around them. The light went gray and dim. Jack felt the ground rise slightly underfoot as they climbed a low ridge blanketed in moss and pine roots. He slowed at the top and looked back. The voices were carrying now, riding on the damp air up through the trees toward where he and Lily stood. Clearer. The rain had stopped, and the forest had gone very quiet, and sound moved through it like water. One voice rose above the others. Calm. Unhurried. The kind of voice that never needed to shout because everyone around it already knew to listen. Jack went absolutely still. He knew that voice. He had not heard it in over a decade. But time had done nothing to change it. Nothing at all. It was the voice of a man he once trusted with his life. A man who had stood beside him through things most people couldn't imagine. A man who had looked him in the eye and called him brother. Rick Malone. Saint. Jack pulled Lily down the backside of the ridge. No hesitation, no wasted movement. His hand was at her elbow, steadying her on the slope, guiding her around the roots that jutted out of the earth like broken fingers. The moss was slick under their boots, and the ground fell away sharply before leveling out into a narrow corridor of trees running northwest. He knew these woods. Not well, but enough. 3 years ago, he had ridden every back road within 20 miles of his shop. Old habit, know your territory, know your exits. Know where you can disappear if you have to. He had found the ranger shelter on one of those rides, tucked back off a fire access trail that nobody used anymore. A squat little building, weathered boards, a rusted tin roof. The kind of place the state forgot about, and nature slowly began to reclaim. It was maybe half a mile from here. Half a mile felt like a long way right now. "Keep close," he said under his breath. Not a command, more of a promise. Lily kept close. They moved through the darkening forest at a steady pace, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough that Jack could still listen. He kept his ears open behind them while his eyes tracked ahead, reading the ground, reading the gaps between trees, reading the shadows that gathered in the low places where the light did not reach. The forest was quiet. That was the part that bothered him. When men like Saint moved through woods, the birds went quiet. The small sounds stopped. The whole living world around them pulled back, as if the forest itself wanted no part of what was coming. Jack had noticed that silence from the ridge. He noticed it still now, stretching out behind them like something held its breath. They didn't slow down. The shelter appeared through the trees exactly where he remembered it. A low structure pressed back against a shallow rock face, half hidden by a curtain of hanging moss and a pair of young oak trees that had grown up close on either side. The tin roof had a skin of pine needles and dead leaves, thick enough that from above it would barely register as a man-made thing at all. Jack moved to the door. Old wood, a simple metal latch gone brown with rust. He pressed the latch with his thumb and pushed. The door resisted, then groaned open on stiff hinges. "In," he said quietly. Lily slipped inside without argument. He followed her in and pulled the door shut behind him. The interior was dim. A single cracked window on the west wall let in a pale slice of fading light. There was an old wooden table, 2 chairs with the seats gone soft, a shelf with rusted cans that had been empty for years, a narrow cot frame against the far wall with no mattress, a rusted iron stove in the corner with a flue pipe that vanished into the ceiling. It was not much. It was enough. Jack crossed to the window and looked out. Trees. Shadow. Nothing moving that he could see. He stepped back and moved the nearest chair underneath the door latch, wedging the top of the chair back up under the handle. Not a serious barricade. But it would buy a few seconds, and right now, a few seconds mattered. He checked the single window. No latch. He pressed the frame with both palms and tested it. Tight in the swollen wood. It wouldn't open quietly from outside. That was something. He moved to the back wall and crouched, pressing his ear briefly against the boards. Wind through the trees. Distant creak of branches. Then something else. A soft crunch, then another, irregular, the sound of careful footsteps pressing through wet pine needles, the deliberate sound of someone trying very hard not to be heard. Jack straightened slowly and turned to face Lily, who sat on the edge of the cot frame with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on him. They were not alone out there. Someone was already circling the shelter. Jack crouched in front of Lily and kept his voice low. "Talk to me," he said. "Everything fast." Lily pulled her knees up to her chest. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, and her hair hung in dark strings across her forehead. A bruise had bloomed along her left cheekbone, deep purple at the center and fading to yellow at the edges. It was not fresh. It was a few days old at least. She had been running for a few days. She took a breath. "I was hitching," she said. "Up near Culpeper. I know. She held up a hand before he could say anything. "I didn't have money for a bus and I needed to get south. A guy in a pickup stopped. Seemed normal. Older. Had a dog in the back seat." Jack said nothing. He just watched her face. "He took me to a truck stop off Route 29. Said he had to meet somebody. I thought it was fine." She paused, swallowed. There were other girls there, 3 of them, all around my age, all sitting quiet in a way that felt wrong, like they had been told exactly how to sit, and they were too tired to do anything else. Her voice stayed steady. That was the part that got to Jack, the steadiness of it, like she had already turned the fear into something harder and more useful. "The man who ran it wasn't loud about it," Lily continued. "He didn't wave a gun around. He just moved people, told them where to go, told them when to get in the van, spoke to the drivers like he was scheduling deliveries." Jack's jaw tightened. "There was a building behind the truck stop. Looked like a storage facility. They took the other girls inside first. I was still in the pickup. The older man left the door unlocked." She said it simply, like she still couldn't quite believe it. "I don't know if he forgot or if he felt bad, but he left it unlocked and I ran." "Into the woods," Jack said. "Into the woods," she confirmed. "I had maybe a 4-minute head start before I heard them behind me. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know exactly where I was. I just ran until my legs stopped working." She looked down at her hands. The skin around her wrists was rubbed raw, pink and irritated from the chains. "I hid in a hollow for a while, but they got too close. I kept moving. Then I found the chain near an old fence line, rusted old thing half buried in the leaves." She looked up at him then. Her eyes were dark and steady, like her mother's eyes. "Another girl told me once," Lily said quietly. "A girl I met in a shelter in Richmond. She said if you're being tracked through woods and you can't outrun them, stop moving. Go invisible. She said they expect you to run, so running is what gets you caught." "So you chained yourself," Jack said. "I chained myself," she said. "I wrapped it around the trunk and threw the loop on my wrists loose enough that I could have gotten free on my own eventually. But from a distance, in the dark, with the rain coming down, it looked like I'd been secured there." A small, dry pause. "I figured they'd assume somebody else already handled it and move on." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Smart," he said. The word came out rough, but he meant it. Lily almost smiled. Almost. He leaned forward. "This man running it, the one at the truck stop, did you hear a name?" She nodded slowly. "The drivers called him something. Not his real name, I don't think. More like a title." She pressed her lips together. "They called him the coordinator. Said he was the one who set up the routes. Which roads, which stops, which drop points." She paused. "He used old transport routes, back roads, routes that someone who knew the area really well had mapped out for him." Jack went very still. Mapped out routes through rural Virginia back roads, routes that someone with deep local knowledge had handed over to be used for moving people. He knew exactly what kind of person mapped routes like that. And he knew exactly what kind of operation Lily had walked into the middle of. Jack found an old tin box on the shelf above the cot. Inside was a basic first aid kit, the kind rangers kept stocked for minor trail injuries. Bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small roll of medical tape, a tube of ointment that was still sealed. Not much, but enough. He lit the lantern he had found hanging near the door. It threw a warm orange glow across the small shelter. Shadows gathered in the corners and along the low ceiling, but the light held steady in the middle of the room where Lily sat on the edge of the cot. She had stopped shaking. That was something. Jack pulled the wooden stool from beneath the small table and set it in front of her. He sat down and opened the tin box across his knee. He did not rush. He moved with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. Steady hands. Steady breathing. "Give me your wrists," he said. She held them out without argument. Up close, in the lantern light, the damage was worse than it had looked in the dark woods. The skin had been rubbed raw in a wide band around both wrists. Not deep enough to bleed badly, but torn in places. Irritated and swollen at the edges. She had been in those chains for hours. He opened an antiseptic wipe and pressed it gently against the worst of it. Lily hissed through her teeth. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine." He worked slowly, careful. He cleaned both wrists and then applied a thin layer of the ointment before wrapping them loosely in bandage cloth. He used just enough pressure to protect the skin without cutting off circulation. She watched his hands the whole time. Not his face. Just his hands. When he finished the wrists, he moved to her face. He pressed 2 fingers lightly to her jaw and turned her head toward the lantern to get a better look at the bruise along her cheekbone. It was ugly. Deep. Something had hit her hard enough to leave that mark, and the thought of it moved through Jack's chest like a slow burn. He pressed a clean, folded cloth dampened from the water tin against it. "Hold that," he said. She reached up and held it in place. He sat back and looked at her properly then. Really looked. The sharp angle of her cheekbones. The dark circles beneath her eyes that told him she had not slept in more than one night. The way her shoulders sat, pulled slightly inward, braced against the next bad thing. She was thin. Too thin for a girl her age. And there was a toughness to her that should not have been there yet. A kind of armor that teenagers were not supposed to need. She had built it herself, piece by piece. Without him. That thought settled on him like a stone. He had not been there. When she needed someone to build a life around, he had not been there. And she had not collapsed without him. She had adapted. She had survived a trafficking ring, run through miles of dark Virginia forest, and chained herself to an oak tree using a strategy she had learned from another runaway in a shelter. She had done all of that alone. The stone in his chest got heavier. "You did good," he said quietly. "Out there. What you did to stay safe. That was smart and brave." Lily lowered the cloth from her cheek. She looked at him directly for the first time since they sat down. "I was scared," she said. "Brave people are always scared," he said. "Doesn't change what you did." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away. Jack leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He kept his voice low and steady, and he meant every single word that came out of his mouth. "Lily." He waited until she looked at him again. "I don't care what it costs me. I don't care what I have to go through. Nobody is taking you again." He held her gaze. "Not while I'm breathing." Jack waited until Lily's breathing slowed and her eyes closed before he moved. He stood carefully from the stool. The wood floor of the shelter creaked once beneath his boot, and he paused. Lily stirred, but did not wake. He watched her for a moment. She had curled onto her side on the narrow cot, her bandaged wrists tucked beneath her chin, her dark hair spread across the rough pillow. She looked younger asleep, softer, like the little girl he remembered from a long time ago. He pulled his jacket from the peg near the door and shrugged it on. Then he lifted the latch slowly and stepped outside. The rain hit him immediately. It was not the gentle drizzle that had started in the forest earlier. It had become something heavier and more serious. The kind of rain that came in at an angle and soaked through layers fast. The kind that turned soft forest ground into mud and made every sound both louder and harder to place. Jack stood under the shallow overhang of the shelter roof for a moment. He let his eyes adjust to the dark. The lantern light inside pushed through a crack in the shuttered window and threw a thin line of yellow across the mud below. He noted it. Too much light showing. He would deal with that when he went back inside. He stepped off the overhang and moved into the rain. The shelter sat in a natural dip between two low ridges covered in pine and scrub oak. There was a narrow path that approached it from the east, and a wider animal trail that curved around to the north. Both were the obvious ways in. Jack had not come by either one. He had cut through the dense brush to the west with Lily, keeping off any trail that could be followed easily. He moved south first, away from both trails. He stayed low and walked along the base of the eastern ridge, watching the ground and the tree line as he went. The rain made it hard, but not impossible. He had spent years reading terrain, knowing what belonged in a landscape and what did not. It was something you learned in the club when runs took you through unfamiliar territory. It was something you never forgot. He found the first sign about 40 yards from the shelter. A broken branch at knee height, snapped clean, not weathered at the break. The white wood inside was still bright, still fresh. Someone had pushed through the brush here within the last couple of hours. He crouched and studied the ground beneath it. The rain was washing things out fast, but he could still make out a partial boot print in the soft soil. Large, deep at the heel. Someone moving with weight and purpose. He kept going. 30 yards further, he found the second sign. A strip of orange plastic caught on a low thorn bush. Thin and bright, the kind of marker that hunters sometimes use to track their own path through dense woodland. Except this was not hunting season, and whoever had left it had pulled it from the bush on the way past, nearly freeing it completely, which meant they were trying to be careful. They were not careful enough. Jack filed it all away and pressed further along the ridgeline, staying parallel to the trail he knew ran north of the shelter. He found the third sign near a wide pine at the trail's edge. 2 boot prints side by side, facing the same direction, facing toward the shelter. And beside them, just slightly offset, a second set of prints, a different tread, a different size. 2 people had stopped here together. They had stood in this spot and looked in the same direction. They were not wandering. They were not lost. They had a direction. They had a pattern. Each sign he had found formed a loose arc that was curving steadily inward toward the shelter from the southeast. Whoever Saint had out here was not stumbling through the woods in the rain hoping for luck. They were working a grid, and the grid was tightening. Jack moved back to the shelter with quiet, urgent steps. He slipped inside and pulled the latch behind him. The warmth of the small space hit him immediately. It smelled like pine dust and damp wool and the faint medicinal sting of the antiseptic he had used on Lily's wrists. He crossed to the window and adjusted the shutter so the lantern light stopped bleeding through the crack. Then he turned and found Lily watching him. She was not asleep anymore. Maybe she had never been. She lay on her side still, but her eyes were open and sharp, and tracking him across the room the way someone tracks movement when they have learned that movement usually means danger. "How close?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but steady. Jack pulled the stool close to the cot and sat. He kept his voice low, too. "Close enough that we need to talk. Right now." Lily pushed herself upright, slowly. She winced when her bandaged wrists pressed against the rough blanket. She settled back against the wall and drew her knees up to her chest. The lantern light caught the bruise along her left cheekbone and made it look darker than it was. "You need to tell me everything you heard," Jack said. "Not just the parts you think matter, all of it." Lily looked at him for a moment. That same measuring look she had given him in the forest before she decided to trust him. Then she nodded. "They had me in the back of a truck," she said. "One of those big cargo vans, white, no windows in the back. There were 2 other girls with me." She stopped, swallowed. I don't know their names. We weren't allowed to talk. Jack did not speak. He waited. The van stopped a lot, like they were checking in with someone. The driver would get out and the other one would stay in the back with us, but he would get on his phone, and he wasn't quiet about it. She picked at the edge of the bandage on her right wrist without seeming to notice she was doing it. I listened. Every time. I just kept listening. What did you hear? Routes, she said. They talked about routes a lot, like roads and times, which roads were safe and which ones had checkpoints. She frowned slightly, reaching back through her memory. They said something about the Eastern Loop being shut down, that they had to switch to the mountain route because the other one had heat on it. Jack kept his expression flat. Inside, he was cataloging every word. They talked about a pickup, too, Lily continued. Someone was supposed to meet the van at a logging place. I heard them say logging yard a couple of times. They were supposed to hand us off there. Did they say where? No, just that it was north. She paused. They seemed nervous about it, the driver especially. He kept saying they were already behind schedule and that the man in charge wasn't someone you kept waiting. Jack leaned forward slightly. Did they use a name? For the man in charge? Lily's eyes moved to the middle distance, the way eyes do when someone is pulling at a memory. She was quiet for a moment. The rain drummed against the shelter roof in a steady, heavy roll. They used a nickname, she said. I remember because it sounded strange. Like the kind of name you'd give someone as a joke, except they said it like it wasn't a joke at all. Jack went very still. They called him Saint, Lily said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Jack's jaw tightened. The muscle along the side of his face pulled flat and hard. He did not blink. He did not move. He just sat with the name for a moment, the way you sit with something that hits you in a place you thought had gone numb. Saint Rick Malone. Not just a ghost from his past haunting this forest by coincidence. The man running this entire operation. The man Lily's captors answered to. The man who had already destroyed Jack's life once was the same man hunting his daughter tonight. Lily watched him. She could see something had shifted in him. The way his shoulders dropped just slightly. The way his hands moved to rest on his knees, fingers pressing down like he needed something solid to hold on to. She had only known him for a matter of hours, but she had already learned to read the small things he did when something hit him hard. You know that name, she said. It wasn't a question. Jack looked at her. Yeah, he said. I know it. He stood up slowly and moved to the far wall. He leaned his back against it and crossed his arms over his chest. The lantern light stretched his shadow long across the floor. He stared at a point somewhere between himself and Lily, not quite looking at anything, like a man sorting through a room full of broken things and trying to figure out where to start. You know I used to ride with the Hells Angels, he said. Lily nodded. Mom told me some of it. Not a lot, but some. Whatever she told you, Jack said. It was probably true. He exhaled slowly through his nose. I was with that club for 17 years. I wasn't on the edges either. I was deep in it. I was their enforcer. You know what that means? Lily shook her head slightly. It means when the club had a problem, he said. I was the one they sent to fix it. He said it plainly. No pride in it. No shame either. Just the flat truth of what he had been. I did things I can't undo. I know that. But the club was also the only family I knew for a long time. You believe in something like that long enough, you stop questioning it. You just ride. He shifted against the wall. The rain outside had softened a little. The drumming on the roof had gone from a roar to a low, steady rhythm. "Rick Malone came into the club about 12 years ago," Jack said. "He was sharp, charming, the kind of guy who walked into a room and made everyone in it feel like he was already on their side. The brothers liked him fast, trusted him fast." He paused. "I trusted him fast." Lily stayed quiet. She could hear it in his voice, the kind of weight that comes from trusting the wrong person. "We called him Saint because he had this way of making bad things sound righteous," Jack said. "Like whatever he was doing, there was always a reason behind it that made it sound almost clean. Almost good." His voice dropped a little. "That should have been the warning sign. It never is, though, when you're in the middle of it." He pushed off the wall and moved back towards the stool. He sat down again, closer this time, like the story required less distance to tell. "About 8 years ago, money started disappearing from the club," he said. "Not small amounts. We're talking serious money, the kind of loss that makes people dangerous and suspicious real fast." He looked at Lily directly. Someone had been skimming for months, siphoning from the club's accounts and hiding the trail. Lily's eyes stayed on him. "They found the trail," Jack said. "Or they thought they found the trail." He let that sit for just a second. "It led straight to me." He said it quietly, but the weight of it filled the whole shelter. Records, transfers, a whole paper trail that looked like I had been stealing from my own brothers for years. His jaw tightened again. "I hadn't touched a single dollar, not one, but the evidence said otherwise. And in that world, evidence is a verdict. There's no courtroom, no appeal. They exiled me, cut me off completely. Everything I had built inside that life, gone in a single night." He looked down at his hands. "It was Saint," he said. "He built the whole thing. Every fake record, every misdirected transfer. He framed me clean so no one would ever look at him, and he walked right into the space I left behind." Lily looked up at him when he stood. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Outside," Jack said. He kept his voice low and even. "Stay here. Don't open that door. Don't make a sound. You can't just leave me here." "I'll be back." He met her eyes. "I promise." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue either. She pulled her knees up to her chest and gave him one tight nod. Jack killed the lantern. The shelter went completely dark. He waited for a few seconds, letting his eyes adjust before he cracked the door. Cold air pushed in through the gap, carrying the smell of wet pine and mud. The rain had settled into a fine mist now, thin and quiet, the kind of rain that made the forest go still. He slipped outside and eased the door shut behind him. The woods were dark, but not completely. A pale half-moon pushed through breaks in the cloud cover, just enough to outline the shapes of trees. Jack moved along the back wall of the shelter first, pressing close to the wet wood, listening. Nothing immediate. He crouched low and moved into the trees to the east. That was the direction the boot prints had come from. He had memorized their pattern when he scouted earlier. 2 sets, overlapping in places, moving in a slow arc around the structure. Whoever they sent out here knew what they were doing. He moved through the underbrush the way the forest taught you to move if you paid attention. Slow shifts of weight, no snapping twigs, no sudden changes in direction. He placed each foot carefully on wet pine needles and soft mud, where the ground swallowed sound. He heard the man before he saw him. A low crackle of a radio, cut off almost immediately. Then the soft sound of boots shifting on damp ground, maybe 40 feet ahead and slightly uphill. Jack stopped. He pressed himself against the thick base of an oak and waited. The figure moved between two trees, just visible in the pale light. A big man, broad across the shoulders. He had a flashlight but kept it angled low, almost off. Smart enough to know bright light killed your night vision. He was scanning slowly, methodically. His head moved left, then right. Then he stopped and lifted the radio to his mouth again. Jack was already moving. He came in from behind and to the right, using the sound of the man's own bootstep to cover the last few feet. He got one arm across the man's throat and used his full weight to drive him sideways into the tree trunk. Hard enough to stun, but not hard enough to knock him out. He needed him talking. The radio dropped into the mud. The man grabbed at Jack's arm with both hands. He was strong, but Jack had leverage, and leverage wins. He tightened the hold just enough to make the point clear. "Easy," Jack said, low and flat against the man's ear. "I just want to talk." The man went still, smart enough to recognize when fighting made things worse. "How many of you are out here?" Jack said. The man said nothing. Jack adjusted his grip. "4, the man said, voice strained. 4 on the ground. Who's running this?" The man hesitated just a half second too long. "Saint," he finally said. "He's running it." Jack felt something cold move through his chest. "He here? In the forest?" "He's on the road," the man said. "North end, where the old logging trail meets the highway. He's got a truck there. He's been on the radio the whole time, directing us. Told us not to come back without the girl." Jack held the grip a moment longer. He could feel the man's pulse hammering against his forearm. "He said she's a problem that needs to disappear," the man added, his voice dropping like he regretted saying it. Jack stepped back and let him drop. He stood over the man in the dark, the mist settling cold on his face. Saint was coordinating everything, personally, from a position close enough to move fast. Jack came back through the shelter door fast. Lily was on her feet before he even spoke. She had been listening. He could tell by the way she stood, weight forward, ready to move. "We have to go," he said. "Where?" "Away from here." He crossed to the corner and grabbed the small canvas pack he had found earlier on a rusted hook. It wasn't much. A coil of old rope, a rusted flashlight that still worked, a folded rain poncho stiff with age. He shook the poncho loose and held it out to her. She took it without a word and pulled it over her head. "How close are they?" she asked. "Close enough." He looked at her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Fast?" She met his eyes. "Try me." He almost smiled. Just barely. He cracked the door, checked the tree line, then moved them out into the night. The storm came back hard about 10 minutes into their walk. It didn't build up slowly or give any warning. One moment the mist was thin and quiet, and the next the sky opened up and rain came straight down in heavy sheets. It hit the pine canopy above them in a loud, constant roar that actually helped. The noise covered their movement. Their footsteps disappeared completely under the sound of it. But the rain made the ground dangerous. The slope they were crossing turned slick fast. Loose pine needles over soft mud became almost like walking on ice. Lily slipped twice. The first time she caught herself on a low branch. The second time Jack caught her by the arm before she went down. She didn't say thank you. She just steadied herself and kept moving. He respected that about her. He led them northeast, away from the direction the scout had come from, away from the road where Saint was parked in his truck with a radio and 4 men in the trees. The forest was thick in this direction. Old growth. The kind of pines that had been growing for 60 or 70 years, with trunks wide enough to hide behind, and branches that spread low and heavy. Jack had ridden this stretch of Virginia back roads for years, not because he had anywhere to go, just because the roads were empty and the rides cleared his head. He knew this area the way a man knows a place when he comes back to it alone, again and again, without fully understanding why. There was a trailhead about a mile northeast, an old fire service access point that hadn't been maintained in years. The trail markers were mostly rotted or knocked over by fallen timber. Nobody used it anymore. The county had officially closed it off after a bridge washout 3 seasons back, and the chain across the entrance had been rusted shut ever since. He had been there once before, maybe 2 years ago, on a ride when the weather had turned on him fast and he needed cover. He had sheltered under the old wooden trailhead sign and waited out a lightning storm. That was when he had found it. He hadn't told anyone about it. There was nobody to tell. The trailhead came into view through the trees after 40 hard minutes of walking. The wooden post that used to hold the trail sign was still there, gray and split at the top. The chain across the narrow gravel path was still rusted in place. Beyond it, the trail disappeared into black. Jack moved past the chain and into the brush on the left side of the path, about 15 feet in, where a thick stand of mountain laurel grew in a tangle close to the ground. He dropped to one knee and pushed the branches back. There it was. An old motorcycle, dark green, a heavy touring bike from the late 80s, covered in years of dead leaves and grime, but still whole. He had hidden it here himself, long ago, during a stretch of his life he preferred not to think about. He had never come back for it. Until now. He pressed his hand flat against the gas tank. Still solid. Jack worked fast. He pulled the dead leaves off the motorcycle in armfuls, tossing them aside into the wet brush. The rain kept coming down. It plastered his hair flat against his forehead and ran cold down the back of his neck, but he barely noticed. His hands moved with purpose. The bike was dirty. Years of grime had settled into every crevice. The chrome was spotted with rust, and the seat had cracked down the middle, the foam inside swollen from moisture. But the frame was solid. The tires still had pressure. Not full pressure, but enough. He checked the engine compartment the way a man checks something he built himself. His fingers moved along the lines and connections from memory. He found the fuel petcock and turned it to the reserve position. He pulled the choke out halfway. "Is that going to work?" Lily asked from behind him. "Yeah." "You sound sure." "I am sure." She was quiet for a second. "How do you know?" He looked back at her over his shoulder. "Because I hid it, and I know how I hide things." She wrapped her arms around herself inside the old poncho. Her hair was soaked and pushed back from her face, and she looked very young standing there in the dark between the trees. But her eyes were steady. He turned back to the bike. He checked the battery connection, a simple cable lead. He had disconnected himself before hiding it. He pressed it back into place and held it firm with a strip of the rope from the canvas pack, wrapping it tight until it wasn't going anywhere. Then he swung onto the seat. He kicked the starter once. Nothing. He kicked it again. A cough. A sputter. A sound like something waking up from a very long sleep. He gave it a third kick with everything he had. The engine caught. It was rough at first, shaking and uneven, belching a small cloud of smoke that the rain immediately swallowed. But it didn't die. It steadied. He held the throttle with a light hand and let it warm up for 30 seconds, which was about 29 seconds longer than he wanted to wait. He looked back at Lily. "Get on." She moved to the bike and stopped at the side of it, studying the cracked seat, then him, then the seat again. "There's not much room," she said. "There's enough. Hold on to me." She climbed on behind him. Her arms came around his waist and he felt her hands grip the front of his jacket. She was shaking a little. Not from fear, he thought. From the cold, from the rain, from 2 days of running through the forest on almost nothing. You good? He asked. Go, she said. He pulled them forward out of the mountain laurel and onto the old gravel path. The chain was behind them. The trail opened up ahead, narrow and dark, cutting through the trees toward the fire service road, about a quarter-mile out. From there it was a straight shot to the county road, and the county road led north, away from all of this. He kept the headlight off. He rode by feel and memory, letting the pale gray shapes of the trees guide him. The gravel crunched under the tires, and the engine kept its low, steady rumble. Lily held on without a word. The trail bent right, and then opened up onto the old fire service road, a flat gravel lane wide enough for a single truck. Jack felt the surface change under the tires and let out a slow breath. Almost there. He turned north. He reached for the throttle. Then the headlights came on. Not one, not two. 4 sets of headlights spread wide across the road ahead, blazing white and blinding in the wet dark. 2 trucks and 2 SUVs, parked bumper to bumper in a line that stretched from tree line to tree line. Jack squeezed the brakes. The motorcycle stopped. Behind them, he heard the sound of another engine rolling in to block the trail they had just come from. They were surrounded. Jack didn't freeze. He turned the handlebars hard to the left, off the gravel road and back into the tree line. The tires bit into the soft, wet earth, and the bike fishtailed for a half-second before finding grip. Lily held on tight, her arms pulling close around his ribs. "Where are we going?" she said into his ear. Bridge. He knew this part of the forest. Not perfectly, but well enough. Years ago, before everything fell apart, he used to ride these back trails alone when he needed to think. There was a narrow wooden bridge about 300 yards northeast, crossing a rocky creek that fed down from the ridge. It was old and barely wide enough for a single vehicle, but it connected to a logging path that wound up and over the hill and came out on the other side of the county line. If they could reach it, they had a chance. He pushed the bike hard through the underbrush, keeping low branches from his face with one forearm, while steering with the other hand. The engine growled and complained as the tires struggled through mud and wet leaves. The headlight was still off. He was riding by memory and instinct. Behind them, doors slammed, boots hit gravel, flashlight beams cut through the trees in long, sweeping arcs. "They're following," Lily said. "I know." He didn't look back. The ground rose slightly and then dipped, and he recognized the shape of the land. The creek was close. He could hear it now under the sound of the rain, a low, rushing sound that filled the spaces between the trees. The bridge was just ahead. He broke through a thin cluster of saplings, and the motorcycle's front tire hit the wooden planks of the bridge with a hollow thud. He stopped. The bridge was narrow, about the width of a doorframe on each side of the bike. The wood was gray and old, and the planks were slick with rain. Below, the creek ran fast and dark, swollen from the storm. On the other side, the logging path climbed up into the dark tree line. He looked at it for 1 second. Then he rolled forward. The wood groaned under the weight of the bike. Lily was completely still behind him. He kept the throttle low, inching forward, feeling each plank shift slightly as the tires crossed it. The rain hammered the creek below, and the sound of it bounced up from the water. Halfway across. 3/4. The far planks came under the front tire, and he felt solid ground on the other side just starting to come within reach. Then a figure stepped out of the trees directly ahead. Then another. Then 2 more. 4 men standing at the far end of the bridge, blocking the path. They were big men in dark jackets, wet from the rain, and each one of them was holding something. 2 had flashlights. 2 had weapons raised. Jack stopped the bike. He turned his head slowly. Behind them, on the near end of the bridge, 2 more men appeared from the tree line, cutting off the way back. Flashlight beams converged on the bridge from both sides, flooding the crossing in harsh white light. Jack felt Lily press closer against his back. He cut the engine. The only sounds were the rain and the rushing creek below. From somewhere in the dark, beyond the men blocking the far end of the bridge, a single pair of boots walked slowly forward. Unhurried, deliberate. The kind of walk that belongs to a man who already knows how something ends. He stepped into the light. He was Jack's age, maybe a little older, with a thick graying beard and a jaw like a brick. He wore a heavy riding jacket with no insignia on it anymore. His hands were loose at his sides. His eyes were calm. Rick Malone. Saint. He looked at Jack the way a man looks at something he has been waiting a long time to see again. Not surprised? Not angry? Almost satisfied. Raven, he said quietly. The men on both ends of the bridge held their positions. No one moved. The creek roared below in the dark, and the rain kept falling, and the bridge held them all suspended between 2 shores with nowhere left to go. Saint didn't rush. He walked to the center of the far end of the bridge and stopped there, hands still loose at his sides, rain running off the shoulders of his jacket. He looked at Jack the way an old friend might look at someone they hadn't seen in a long time. Easy, almost warm. It made Jack's skin crawl. "Been a while," Saint said. Jack said nothing. He kept both hands on the handlebars. He could feel Lily breathing behind him, short and tight, trying to stay quiet. Saint's eyes moved past Jack for just a moment. They landed on Lily. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not surprise, more like mild inconvenience. "Didn't expect you to be the one to find her," Saint said. "That's a funny thing. World works in strange ways, I guess." "Back off, Rick." It was the first time Jack had used his real name in over a decade. It felt strange in his mouth, like picking up something he had buried on purpose. Saint tilted his head slightly. "Rick." He said the name like he was tasting it. "Nobody calls me that anymore. I'm not nobody." Saint smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "No? You're not?" He took one slow step closer. The boards beneath him creaked but held. The flashlight beams from both ends of the bridge kept everything lit in flat, cold white. Rain pattered against the old wood. "You look rough," Saint said, studying Jack's face. The bruise forming under Jack's left eye. The torn sleeve on his jacket. The mud caked into his boots. "Life been hard out here?" "Hard enough." "Yeah." Saint nodded like he already knew. "I heard things, here and there. Heard you were fixing bikes out by the county line, keeping your head down." He paused. "Heard you lost the house. Lost Karen." Jack's jaw tightened. "Heard Lily didn't want anything to do with you." Saint said it gently, which was worse than if he had said it mean. "That must have hurt. A man like you, alone like that." "You don't get to talk about my daughter." "She's sitting right behind you," Saint said. "Seems like I already am." One of the men at the far end shifted his weight. Jack clocked it without moving his eyes from Saint. He was counting. 6 men total. 2 behind, 4 ahead. The bridge was too narrow to turn the bike around. The creek below was running fast and cold. He stayed still. Saint looked down at the bridge boards for a moment. He seemed to be deciding something. Then he looked back up, and when he did, something in his face had changed. The easy warmth was gone. What was underneath it was harder and older. "You always thought it was bad luck," Saint said. "Didn't you? What happened to you back then? The accusations, the vote, The way the brothers turned on you?" He shook his head slowly. "You thought it was just the way things fell." Jack watched him. "It wasn't bad luck, Raven." The rain filled the silence between them. "I built it," Saint said, "piece by piece. Every rumor, every missing dollar they found with your name on it, every whisper that went around the table before the vote." He spoke plainly, without pride, like he was simply explaining how something worked. "I needed you gone. You were in the way of something I was building, something big, and you were too straight for it, too stubborn. You would have stood in the doorway and refused to move." He paused. "So I moved you." Lily made a small sound behind Jack. Something between a breath and a word. Jack didn't move. He didn't speak. The creek screamed below them in the dark. "Your exile," Saint continued, his voice steady and even. "Your broken marriage, the years you lost with her." His eyes flicked briefly toward Lily again. "All of it traces back to one decision I made a long time ago." He let that sit there between them on the wet bridge, in the rain, above the rushing water. "I needed you to know that," Saint said, "before this ends." Jack didn't wait for Saint to finish smiling. He twisted the throttle hard, and the old motorcycle screamed to life. The back tire spun against the wet boards and kicked up a spray of dirty water as the bike lurched forward. He aimed straight at the gap between two of Saint's men on the near end of the bridge. They didn't expect it. One of them jumped sideways. The other took the handlebar across the hip and went down hard against the railing. Wood splintered. The man yelled. Jack felt Lily's arms lock tight around his waist. For 1/2 second, it felt like they were going to make it. Then the rope caught the front wheel. It came up from the bridge boards fast, pulled taut by 2 men on either side of the railing. The tire hit it, and the bike bucked violently. Jack felt the handlebars rip from his grip. The world tilted sideways. Then he was in the air, and then he was not. He hit the bridge hard on his left shoulder. The impact sent a white-hot burst of pain all the way down his arm. The bike skidded and crashed against the railing, its engine sputtering and dying. Lily. He pushed himself up immediately, ignoring the pain, scanning the bridge. She had been thrown, too. She was on her hands and knees about 6 feet away, her hair soaked and plastered to her face, trying to get up. "Lily, run!" She looked at him. She looked at the men closing in from both sides. There was nowhere to run. Jack got to his feet and put himself between her and the nearest 2 men. His left arm was already stiff and wrong. He used his right. The first man came in fast, and Jack caught him under the chin with an elbow that snapped the man's head back. He went down. The second man tackled Jack low, driving him back against the motorcycle. Metal dug into his spine. He grabbed the man by the collar and threw him into the railing. 2 more came. Jack fought with everything he had. Every hard and ugly year of his life lived in his fists and his feet and his elbows. He moved through them the way he always had, efficient and without wasted motion, protecting the ground around Lily. But there were too many. The blow came from behind. Something hard and flat caught the back of his skull. His vision went white. His knees buckled. He caught himself on one hand against the bridge boards, head spinning, rain hitting the back of his neck. "Dad!" Lily screamed. He tried to stand. A boot connected with his ribs. He went down onto his side, another hit across the shoulders. He curled instinctively, protecting his head with both arms, even as his left arm screamed at him. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear her, still fighting. Lily was fighting them. He could hear the struggle, feet scraping wood, her voice, sharp and furious, not crying, not begging. Fighting. "Get her in the truck," Saint's voice said somewhere above the noise. Calm, like he was giving directions to somewhere simple. "Let go of me," Lily's voice cracked across the bridge. Jack pushed himself up again. He made it to his knees. A fist caught him across the jaw, and the world tilted sideways a second time. He tasted blood. He made it to one knee again. His body was shaking. His vision kept breaking apart at the edges. He heard her scream his name one more time. Then the sound of boots on wet ground, moving away from the bridge, moving into the trees, getting quieter. Then nothing but the rain. Jack knelt alone in the middle of the bridge, head hanging, blood dripping from his chin into the wet wood beneath him. His hands were flat against the boards. His chest heaved. The creek roared beneath him. The forest was silent around him. Lily was gone. The first thing Jack felt was cold. Not the sharp cold of wind or water. This was the deep, settled cold of a body that had been lying still on wet ground for a long time. It had worked its way through his jacket, through his shirt, into his bones. It sat in his shoulder like a stone. He opened his eyes. Gray light pressed through the tree canopy above him. Pale and thin, the kind of light that comes before the sun has fully committed to rising. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, but the trees still dripped. Every few seconds a heavy drop would fall from a branch somewhere above him and hit the mud beside his face. He was off the bridge. He didn't remember moving. His body must have crawled on its own, or maybe Saint's men had dragged him here and left him in the dirt beside the tree line. Either way, he was on the ground at the edge of the forest, face turned to one side, cheek pressed into wet leaves and dark mud. He didn't move right away. He just breathed. In. Out. Slow and even, the way he had trained himself to breathe when everything else was falling apart. A long time ago, a man named Decker had told him that breathing was the one thing no one could take from you. Jack had not thought about Decker in years. He thought about him now. In. Out. He pressed both palms flat against the ground and pushed. Pain moved through his left shoulder like something had been pulled loose inside it. His ribs answered with a dull, grinding ache that sharpened every time his chest expanded. His jaw felt thick and heavy on one side. When he ran his tongue along the inside of his cheek, he tasted dried blood. He got to his hands and knees. The world did not spin this time, which he took as a good sign. He stayed there for a moment, head hanging between his shoulders, looking at the mud beneath him. His knuckles were split and dark with dried blood. His left jacket sleeve was torn open at the shoulder. He could see his arm. Bruised bad but not broken, he rotated it slowly, carefully, testing it. It moved. It hurt, but it moved. Not broken. He sat back on his heels and looked around. The bridge was about 30 feet away. The motorcycle was still there, tipped against the railing where it had come to rest after the crash. One side mirror was gone. The front panel was dented and scraped. But the frame looked whole. The bridge was empty. Saint's men were gone. The whole stretch of trail in both directions was empty and quiet, the way a place gets quiet after something loud and terrible has moved through it. Broken branches, tire tracks in the soft mud at the edge of the tree line. Boot prints everywhere, overlapping, churned up by the rain until most of them had softened into shapeless impressions. Jack stood up slowly. He steadied himself against a pine trunk for a moment, waiting for his legs to decide if they were going to cooperate. They did, barely. He took one step, then another. He walked to the bridge and stood at its edge, looking at the tire tracks. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Heavy. They had come in from the north end of the trail and left the same way. He crouched down beside the nearest set of tracks and studied them. The mud had not fully filled them back in yet. The edges were still fairly clean, not yet softened all the way by the night air. They weren't old. He stood and looked north along the trail where the tracks disappeared into the trees. He listened, and then he heard it. Far off, distant and faint and half swallowed by the forest, the low rumble of a vehicle engine far down the trail, moving slowly, still moving, still close enough to hear, which meant Lily was still somewhere out there. Jack knew one road out of these woods. It ran west, away from the trail, cutting through a stretch of old farmland before it hit the edge of Delaware County. He had ridden it maybe 100 times over the years, back when riding was the only thing that kept him from coming apart at the seams. He knew every bend, every pothole, every rusted mailbox. He also knew the old blue farmhouse at the end of Cutter Road. He got the motorcycle upright. It took 3 tries and cost him badly in the shoulder, but he got it up. He checked the engine by sound when it turned over. Rough, but running. He didn't need it to be pretty. He needed it to move. He rode slowly at first, testing his grip, letting his hands remember the handles. The pain was loud, but manageable. He focused on the road and nothing else. It took him 20 minutes to reach Cutter Road. The farmhouse looked the same as it always had. Small. Neat. A little worn at the edges, like someone had been meaning to repaint the shutters for years and kept running out of time. A single light burned in the front window, pale yellow against the gray morning. There was a truck parked in the gravel drive, an old green one with a cracked passenger mirror held together with electrical tape. Jack stopped the motorcycle at the edge of the driveway. He sat there for a moment, engine idling, looking at the house. Then the front door opened. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was in her late 50s, with short gray hair and sharp, careful eyes. She wore an old flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and she held a coffee mug in one hand, with the ease of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. She looked at Jack the way a person looks at something they expected to show up eventually. "You look terrible," Mara Donnelly said. "I know," Jack said. She studied him for another moment. Then she tilted her head toward the door. "Come inside." The kitchen smelled like coffee and something herbal, some kind of salve she kept in a small tin on the counter. Jack recognized the smell from years ago. She had always kept something like that nearby, back when patching people up was her full-time job inside the club. She was the one they called when things went wrong, and a hospital was not an option. She still moved the same way, quiet and efficient, no wasted steps. She set her mug down and pointed at the chair nearest the window. "Sit." He sat. She worked without asking permission. She pressed 2 fingers gently along his jaw, checked his eyes, rotated his shoulder carefully while he held his breath against the pain. She pulled back his sleeve and examined the bruising on his forearm. She pressed carefully along his ribs, watching his face for the flinch. She found it on the left side. "Bruised," she said. "Not broken. You got lucky." "I don't feel lucky." She didn't answer that. She cleaned the cut along his cheekbone and taped it closed with small, precise strips. Then she poured him a mug of coffee without asking and set it in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it and looked at her. "Mara," he said, "they have my daughter." Her hands stopped moving. She looked at him across the kitchen table, really looked at him, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not surprise exactly, more like the quiet settling of something she had hoped she would not have to hear. "Tell me everything," she said. So he did. He told her about the road and the crying and the chains. He told her about the shelter and the scout and the bridge. He told her about Saint, about the trafficking routes, about Lily overhearing things she was never supposed to hear. He told her all of it, straight through without stopping. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Mara looked down at the table for a long moment. Then she looked up. "I know where Saint runs his supply stops," she said. "I've known for a while. I just didn't have a reason to do anything about it yet." She set both hands flat on the table. "Now I do," she said. "I'll help you." Mara moved to the far side of the kitchen and pulled open a drawer beneath the counter. She dug past a stack of folded dish towels and pulled out a rolled paper map. She spread it flat on the table, pressing the corners down with her coffee mug, and a small clay pot that held a dried sprig of something Jack couldn't name. The map was hand-drawn in places. Someone had added notes in pencil along certain roads, marking buildings and turn-offs that wouldn't show up on anything official. Jack recognized the style. It was the kind of map people inside the life made when they didn't want anyone outside it to know what they knew. Mara's finger moved across the paper and stopped near the eastern edge of a stretch marked with old timber root lines. "Harlan's yard," she said. Jack leaned closer. The name sat beside a square box drawn in pencil, positioned at the end of a long, private road that cut off the main county route and disappeared into a dense cluster of elevation lines. Old logging territory, the kind of land that hadn't been commercially active in decades, left behind when the timber company that once owned it folded and walked away. "I know that area," Jack said. "Rode past it a few times years back. Thought it was just abandoned." "That's exactly what Saint wants people to think," Mara said. She tapped the box with one finger. "There's a warehouse there. Holds equipment from the old logging operation. Tractors, haulers, storage units. But the back section has been converted. Saint's been using it as a transfer point. Vehicles move through there at night mostly, sometimes early morning before traffic picks up on the county road." Jack straightened slowly, keeping his breathing steady against the ache in his ribs. "Transfer point for what?" Mara looked at him steadily. "People, Jack." The word landed hard. He pressed his jaw tight and looked back down at the map. "How many men?" he asked. "Hard to say for certain," she said. "When there's a run coming through, he keeps 4 or 5 on the ground. Maybe 1 or 2 more inside depending on what he's moving and how nervous he is." She paused. "After last night, he's going to be nervous." "Good," Jack said. Mara folded her arms. "That's not necessarily good. Nervous men make bad decisions and shoot faster." "I know," he said. "I'm counting on the bad decisions." She studied him for a moment. Then she crossed to the counter again and opened a lower cabinet. She reached back past a row of mason jars and lifted out a small metal box, the kind with a latch that clicked open with a thumbnail. Inside, packed in a dark cloth, was a handgun. She set it on the table beside the map. Beside it, she placed a folded piece of paper. "That's the access road layout. I drew that from memory, so it's not perfect. But the main gate, the side entrance along the tree line on the north side, and the warehouse loading doors are marked." She pushed the paper toward him. "The north side entrance is your best way in. It's far enough from where they park their vehicles that you can get close without headlights giving you away." Jack picked up the paper and studied it carefully. His eyes moved slowly across every line, every marking. He filed it all away, the way he used to file things when precision meant the difference between walking out of a situation or not walking out at all. He set the paper down and picked up the handgun. He checked it with practiced hands, working through the motions without rushing, making sure everything was as it should be. Mara watched him without speaking. When he set the gun down again, he looked at the map one more time, tracing the long, private road with his eyes from its cutoff point all the way to the warehouse square at the end. Lily was somewhere at the end of that road. He reached out and folded the map carefully, then tucked it into his jacket pocket alongside the access layout. His hands were steady. He was ready to go get his daughter. The night was thick and moonless. Jack left Mara's truck half a mile back, pulled off the road and tucked behind a row of overgrown brush where no passing headlights would catch it. He moved on foot the rest of the way, staying off the gravel road and keeping to the tree line on the north side exactly the way Mara's drawing had shown him. The ground was still wet from the storm. Soft mud swallowed each footstep quietly. That was fine by him. Quiet was exactly what he needed. He moved slowly. There was no rushing this. Rushing got people killed. The tree line curved gently to the left and he followed it, watching the dark shapes ahead take form as his eyes adjusted. First came the fence. Chain link, about 8 feet tall, running the length of the north perimeter, rusted in places, old enough that the bottom corner nearest a thick pine had buckled outward, lifting just enough from the ground. Jack crouched beside it and tested the gap with his hand. He pressed the fencing up carefully, and the old metal bent without much complaint. He flattened himself against the ground and pulled himself through, slow and quiet, the way a man learns to move when noise is the enemy. He came up on the other side and crouched low behind a stack of rotting timber pallets. He waited there for a full minute, listening. Voices. 2 of them. Coming from somewhere near the front of the building. Low conversation, not alert, not searching. Just men standing somewhere they thought was safe, talking the way bored men talk when they expect nothing to happen. Good. The warehouse itself was large, bigger than he had imagined from Mara's sketch. Sheet metal walls gone orange with rust along the lower edges, a flat roofline, 2 loading bay doors on the south face, both closed. Dim light leaked from the edges of one of them. Jack moved along the back of the pallet stack, staying in the shadow it cast from the faint glow around the building. He pressed himself against the warehouse wall and moved toward the north side corner. There was a personnel door there, just like Mara had marked. He reached it, tried the handle with 2 careful fingers. Unlocked. He eased it open 1 inch at a time, watching the gap widen, listening for hinges. The hinge gave a faint scrape near the top, and he stopped. Waited. The voices near the front of the building kept going, uninterrupted. He slipped inside. The air in the warehouse was heavy. Diesel and damp wood and something else beneath it that Jack didn't want to name. The kind of smell that told you things had happened in a place that should not have happened anywhere. The interior was darker than outside. Shapes came slowly. Old equipment sat idle along the far wall. A rusted tractor with no tires, metal shelving units, stacked crates. The light was coming from the far left corner of the space, behind a plywood partition that had been built inside the warehouse to section off a back area. Jack moved toward it, stepping carefully, avoiding a loose board that shifted slightly under his first step, and choosing the edge of the concrete instead. He reached the partition and found the gap where it met the far wall. He looked through. There were 3 transport containers, the kind used for long-haul freight, pushed up inside the loading bay area. Their doors faced inward. One of them was padlocked shut. Beside it, sitting on a metal folding chair with her wrists zip-tied to the frame and her chin lifted in quiet defiance, was Lily. Her face had a bruise blooming high on one cheekbone. Her clothes were still damp from the storm. Her hair was tangled, and her lip was swollen on one side. But her eyes were open, and in them was something Saint clearly had not managed to kill. She was still fighting. Even sitting still, even bound to that chair, she was still fighting. Jack could see it in the hard set of her jaw, and the way she refused to look at the ground. He pressed his back to the partition and closed his eyes for one breath. She was alive. Jack counted 2 guards inside the partition area. One was leaning against the far wall near the padlocked container, scrolling through his phone. The other was closer, standing near the loading bay door with his arms crossed, facing away. Jack moved first on the one near the door. He came through the gap in the partition fast and low and had the man down before he could turn all the way around. One arm locked around his throat, pressure applied until the body went slack. Controlled. No noise. He lowered the man to the concrete gently and was already moving toward the second guard before the first one settled. The second guard saw him coming and reached for his waistband. He was fast. But Jack was already inside the reach. He drove a forearm hard into the man's chest and pinned him against the container wall with enough force to knock the air clean out of him. The phone clattered to the floor. The man crumpled. Jack turned immediately to Lily. She had gone rigid the moment he came through the partition, bracing herself. Then she saw his face. Something in her broke open like a window in a storm. "Dad," her voice cracked on the single word. "I got you." He was already at her wrists, pulling the utility knife from his belt, working the zip ties. "Hold still." The plastic snapped. Her arms dropped forward and she winced, rolling her wrists slowly. Jack gripped her by the shoulders and looked at her face. The bruise, the swollen lip, the exhaustion pressed into every feature. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes." No hesitation. "Then we walk right now." He helped her up from the chair, and she found her footing quickly, leaning on him only for the first 2 steps. He kept one hand on her back, guiding her toward the partition gap. They were halfway across the floor when the loading bay door behind them rolled upward with a heavy metallic groan. Light poured in from outside. And in the center of that light stood Rick Malone. Saint looked exactly the same as he had on the bridge. Calm, almost casual. Like a man who expected things to go sideways and had simply been waiting for them to catch up to his expectations. 2 men flanked him, both armed. "Jack." Saint tilted his head slightly, the way he used to at the club table when he was about to say something that sounded reasonable but wasn't. "You just do not quit." Jack positioned himself in front of Lily without a word. "Step aside," Saint said. "This doesn't have to go any worse than it already has." "It's already over," Jack said. Saint smiled. "You're standing in my building with a busted rib and no backup. Doesn't look over to me." "Look again." The sound came from outside first, the sweep of headlights cutting across the tree line beyond the fence. Then engines. More than one. Then the unmistakable sound of radio static and a voice cutting through it clearly, calling out unit positions. Saint's expression didn't break immediately. He held it together for a moment, that controlled mask staying right where it was. But his eyes shifted. They moved to the fence line, to the lights, to the shapes now moving along the perimeter. Then the mask cracked. "Go." He turned sharply to the 2 men beside him. "Go now." Neither of them moved. One of them raised both hands slowly instead. Blue and red light began strobing through the gaps in the sheet metal walls, painting the inside of the warehouse in flashes of color. Voices called out from multiple directions. Boots hit gravel. The second loading bay door was forced up from outside, and officers moved in with weapons drawn and purpose in every step. Saint turned in a slow circle. Nowhere to go. Every exit covered. He looked at Jack one last time. That calm he had carried for years finally gone, replaced by something smaller and uglier beneath it. An officer moved to him with handcuffs already out. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was pressing itself up over the tree line, thin and pale and quiet. The storm had passed. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.